Good evening, everyone. My name is Sylvia Liska, and as president of the Secession Friends, I welcome you to our artist talk in the context of Simone Fattal's exhibition titled Metaphors, with a capital S at the end. Let me begin by briefly introducing Simone Fattal, and above all, by thanking you, dear Simone, from the bottom of my heart for this gift of an exhibition. Thank you very much. Simone Fattal was raised in Damascus and in Beirut. She studied archaeology and philosophy in France and began painting in the early 70s. She left Lebanon in the 80s to settle in California, where she founded Post Apollo Press, a legendary art book publishing house. For the next 30 years, she dedicated herself to publishing literature and poetry, producing many books with her late partner, Etel Adnan. At the end of the 80s, she fell in love with working with clay. Simultaneously, she developed her artistic language, always accompanied by music, in creating work steeped in the millennia-old culture and history of the Middle East, its epic literature, poetry, archaeology, and landscape. All these elements united in her collages, which can be read like miniatures of culture and time. It is my great pleasure to also welcome Emma Enderby, whose professional experience, I just read her extensive bio, would merit the lifetime of a very old person. Emma holds degrees from UCL in Oxford. She's a curator, writer, and lecturer. She has worked as chief curator at the newly created Shed in New York, as well as curator at the Public Art Fund, Haus der Kunst in München, and the Serpentine Galleries in London, working with artists like Hilma af Klint, Rachel Rose, Thomas Saraceno, Trisha Donnelly, and Tony Coates, just to name a few. This May, Emma has been appointed as director of Kunstwerke Berlin. Congratulations. Thank you, Emma, for being here with us. I'm handing over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the introduction, the invitation. So this morning I had this very distinct pleasure of entering the exhibition without all your lovely faces and without all of the chairs. And I will say it was this incredible moment. I look forward to you all seeing it once all of this dissipates later. There was this amazing opening up, and I immediately saw the kind of the arches under the legs of the warriors, the arches and the paintings behind, the arches and the collages of the great American landscapes. And what struck me instantly is that I was reminded of this feeling that I often get when I enter your exhibitions, that you always create a world, and that there is a narrative that is made through the juxtapositions and through the different bodies of work that you bring into a space, that there's always a story unfolding within the way that you make your work and the way that you make exhibitions. So I'll just start there in this very open question of what is the story here in our exhibition in Metaphors?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you and the whole team of Secession who have been wonderful to me. And now to this particular installation, I must say I was adamant for bringing the 5 warriors as an anchor to the whole story, because they are the warrior is a character that I do a lot. I haven't yet finished doing more and more, but these are iconic. They are, I find, they embody the idea very well. I exhibited them in Lebanon at the Gallery Tanit. Naila, who is here, did a wonderful installation for them. But we brought them from Beirut because, I mean, they're not artists, they're people, and I like to tell stories. I like to tell stories because life is about stories. We all have one, and we live among many. And all my work revolves about stories because my work comes from reading, from books, more than it comes from history of art. Of course, history of art is there too, but it's the main thing. The themes, the idea, the forms come from the stories, the epics, the history, the plays. And the fact that they are made in clay, and a clay that is not glazed, put them more in contact with actually their place of birth, if I may say so. So that's how it started. Then everything else revolved around it because it, for instance, the clouds, I wanted pieces that were never shown. They were never shown, and they go so well with the paintings I've just done last September in Senegal. And they have the same movement, the same, I would say the same movement. This is, very important to find a lot of conversation between the pieces.
And you often also work in for me at least, in a very site-specific way. I think it was what struck me in Venice when you were in Cecilia's Biennale in 22, no.
22. Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah.
The Milk of Dreams, and you were in the garden, the Scarpa garden, which is so incredible, and what you brought into that space felt so reflective of the architect's intention of that space. It was this kind of calm.
I'm very, very proud if I can be in sync with that fantastic space. Yeah. I was given that space, but also Cecilia Alemani had already chosen to show in that space the two big sculptures which are Adam and Eve. And therefore, it was already there what I had to put with them, something very austere, very archaic. I mean, how can you go more archaic than Adam and Eve? And so it was like easy. Because the themes of my work are this repetition. They're always going together because it's the same idea. So, it was great to show my work there.
It felt like kind of guardians of the idea of rest and meditation in that space. But you've worked here also in a somewhat site-specific way with some of the new collages. Several are here, but there's also some downstairs, which directly reference Gustav Klimt's Beethoven's The Frieze for the Ninth Symphony. And what drew you to this?
I like to always have also a dialogue with the space where I show my work. And it was absolute necessity to speak about Beethoven because, first of all, it's very important in my life and for this space. So it would just gel together. And I made them at the last minute because we didn't think before. I asked Jeanette, the curator, to send me sheets of music by Beethoven, but I was unable to cut them and make a collage with them. So I had to find another idea, which was quotes of the musicians speaking about Beethoven. So there is one quote by Wagner and another by Liszt. And so I made the collage around these. And here you have the text of the Schiller's poem, Ode à la Joie, that I also did at the last minute. They are written with oil on paper, and so they will bring everything together. Yeah.
I've always been, just to stay with the collages for a moment, really interested in the process of the way that you formulate your collages. And I was curious to hear, do they begin, such as in this case, often with a kind of an idea or an event, or with sometimes an image, with a found image that you have? I imagine you must have a vast archive of images that then you use within your collages.
Very, very often they start with one image that I suddenly feel it has to stay, it has to be seen, and I work around it. But they all contain the same topics like archaeology, nature, and modern art. So and I want these collages to be read as if they were Persian miniatures. You go from one item to the next. It's not like the whole collage is a painting, like in the work of Schwitters, for instance. He make an abstract painting of his collage. But no, I want people to look and read every image. Now, in these ones here, they had a theme because I made them during the confinement, and I felt I had a lot of those magazines of the American West, with the beautiful national parks. So I wanted to talk about nature. And the confinement was a wake-up call to tell us the planet needs care. But I always thought that we will go back to worse after it stopped. And people thought, that we'll never take another plane, we'll never do waste, we'll never do this. And finally, it's worse than before.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Yeah. There is, some lack of learning, I think. I think it was interesting to see these that you were making in the pandemic with nature and with the trees, and it reminded me, I read how some of the first works you ever made were of trees that were lost in Beirut. Some of your first paintings
To do what?
were of trees.
Yes, exactly. Yes. They connect with my first paintings, which were trees. I worked a lot when I started with pastels, because pastel is a wonderful direct medium. You have the color right there, you have everything, the matter also. And so, you see, it's a theme that is recurring, sure.
From the very beginning.
Well, in nature, there are mountains, rivers, and trees. It's not too many things, but we have to really think about each one and
What we begin with.
really think, yeah.
I wrote down this quote by you, and I wanted to read it back to you, because I don't think I can put it better myself. But my characters are a link between our contemporary situation and our history. And I think that's such a perfect way of describing your work, because I've often felt they're not really about the past. They're very much contemporary works.
Yeah.
They're about our present moment. But they use a kind of vocabulary from kind of an ancient aesthetic or these kind of sources that you draw on. And of course, like with these warriors, when I look at them, of course, one thinks of war, but with these legs, one thinks of migration and movement as well, and it's all bound up with a kind of a contemporary image as well. And so why has it been since the very beginning for you so important to use these kind of ancient images to understand our moment now?
Well, the image came, I would say, from the poetry. When I started working in clay, all this poetry, all this history came to mind, which was inexistent before. I was a painter for 10 years, and I never thought of anything except the landscape and the trees, very items, subjects that were available right there in front of me. But when I first touched clay, something happened. It's the people and the poets. You know, I have sentences in my head. I have stories, and I want to tell them now. They don't speak about the past because you can't speak about the past. We know nothing about the past. We know a few artifacts. That's it. But these images, I find that they are still alive with us. I find a lot of images made, vessels, objects, colors, flowers that were made 3000 BC, which are being done today. There is a complete continuity in the form, in the way you think about things. And this is what I came with. Now, my first character was Adam. And I was reading Islamic mysticism texts, and in those, Adam is considered a prophet. And he is very tall. So I had to pick a guy with long legs. And from there, all the other guys came, as in history, with long legs. So you see, it's really a coincidence. I go with what's going on.
Yeah.
It's not that I think beforehand. Now it's become like a trademark. I like them because they embody the idea, the very idea of man. A man is someone who is standing up. He is erect. He one day got up. And this is what I'm talking about. I think people will look at these. I wanted them also to be talking about us in the future, like the Chinese warriors were found in the tombs of the emperor a few years ago. They were this army of gods. And I don't think I will make 1,000, but that's the idea.
That can be your unrealized project, the tomb with 1,000.
1,000 warriors,
Yeah.
and 1,000 mushrooms.
Yeah. I just wanted to touch on your own biography for a moment. I mean, you grew up amongst the ancient ruins of Syria and Lebanon, and then you lived through the partition of the country, the Lebanon, by the Ottoman Empire, in the Ottoman Empire, civil war when you exiled and left and came to California. And I was wondering if you could kind of share from that journey and that experience and maybe your childhood, how it's really impacted the vocabulary of your work?
Well, my personal history does not come so much in my work. I'm not interested in my history. It's boring.
It's not boring. That it's quite something, but okay.
You know, I mean, my history is the same for everybody, every Lebanese, Syrian person.
Yeah.
They had to go with war, and a lot of them are dispersed all over the world. Families are totally, how shall I say, separated. And so, but in my personal life, I tried to. It was very difficult for me to leave, but once I left, I tried to do the best of it. For instance, when I went to California, it was a wonderful experience to work there. I started my publishing. To work in America is extremely pleasant. It's easy. It's good. I learned a lot. I didn't know anything about publishing. I had to learn everything, and people helped. People welcomed me. So, you always find a good side to things. And then you had to leave California. Things don't last.
Yeah. Was it, when did you begin first working with clay? Because you were a painter before.
Yeah, when I went, sorry about this.
To us, it sounds like we're in a
so
kind
much
of
echo.
bath.
I hope it's not too loud and unpleasant.
No, I think it's okay. Yeah, people are nodding. Yeah.
I'll tell you, when I had to leave Lebanon and I had to pack all my work, the paintings, the pastels, which were really big. I mean, the pastels were practically the size of trees, and they are all lost. So it was a very traumatic experience. When I arrived in California, I did not want to paint. This is what it was too painful. And so it took a year before I had an idea, and the publishing came to me by chance, because actually I wanted to make one chapbook for Ethel for her birthday, and so I had to learn everything about making a book. But then somebody told me I'd like to translate one of Ethel's books. I said, well, if you translate it, I'll publish it. So finally, in a few months, I had 2 books. And when you start, you have to go on. Because if you stop, the 2 books are dead. So you have to keep going. And which I did for 30 years, just for saying this. Be careful what you say. One sentence. But it was a wonderful experience. It was actually the right thing to do, because had I started painting in my room, I would have been nowhere, nobody. Whereas this made me in contact with all the California, I mean Berkeley and the whole region were full of extraordinary writers, not too much artists. Not important, interesting artists. A lot of wonderful writers and poets, and that was wonderful. It gave me this link to them.
Of course, it gave you a
and
community.
to also all the Middle East studies professors, all the Islamic scholars, etc. Because each book brought his readership, brought his friends. And so,
It was a whole.
and then after a while, maybe, when I started publishing in 82, in 88, I thought I could go back to a artistic practice, and I started the sculpture.
And the first work being Adam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From the beginning.
From the beginning. you, yeah. Just to stay with the publishing for a moment. I mean, it's become such an iconic press, and I know why. But can you share why it was called the Post-Apollo Press?
Well, because then Teil and I were absolutely enthused and entranced with the Apollo program that took man on the moon, and we thought that it was a new era, the era of going into the sky and from planet to planet, and that it was going to be post-Apollo, like BC and AD. So that was the idea, and so I asked her to draw the moon. And she said, no, you should take your name. I said, no, I want Post-Apollo. And of course, it was a difficult name at the beginning. Nobody understood where it came from. And then...
No, it makes a lot of sense. No? The moon became the very iconic logo. No?
Yes, the logo has become iconic.
Yeah. Yeah, you should begin it again. No, you shouldn't stop. I mean, I was curious, like looking at some of the collages, and I know you shared that your biography is not always something you want to think about within the work, but sometimes there is the personal that weaves in, and I'm curious about that balance for you between bringing in the personal and the universal within the work, especially the collages. I was thinking of this one round here, which has you sculpting, has your own house, as well as Caspar David Friedrich and Frank Gehry building, and
Yes, well, these are the only instances where if picture is lying around, I would use it. Like this splendor in the Renaissance painting, where the painter would put himself in the corner. I did it a few times. It's nice.
No, it's like an Easter egg moment. It's really
it's
a moment.
It's amusing. Yeah.
It's amusing. And
I mean, it's not like
no.
I don't put my picture like
very small. But I think it links back to what actually something else that I've felt that a number of people have noted about your work is that there is somewhat of there's an abstractness left often. I mean, you can see that with the clouds or with the warriors, which allows for a kind of timelessness and one to project their own self in a way or their own time onto the work. I think about my own experience of seeing the works 10 years ago versus now, and the way that you see different things because the time that you're in is different. And I was just wondering about your relationship with this kind of the abstraction that you give the works as well.
Yeah, I like abstract art. I mean, it's what I like in art more than the rest. And so everything I do is a bit abstracted. Because also in this particular work, it will be linked to, as you just said, timelessness. It's not from one moment and for one day. It can stand the time, because time is something I think a lot about. Time is, you can say many things about time, that it doesn't exist, that we just go by and the time stays like this, or we can say it goes on and on. You know, it's we participate into a life that is continuous, and so if you can have a piece of art that corresponds to this kind of work, is better, is good. Yeah. Because from where I'm coming from, the past is very much present. And this is what one of the things I found extremely difficult when I went to the US, because if you see anything in the US, like a pizza parlor, well, this pizza parlor is only a pizza parlor. There's nothing behind. But if you are in Damascus, there is 5,000 years of history behind everything you look at. So, so you live with that. I mean, I live with that. And especially, I'm also interested in this history. So abstract art comes naturally to this way of thinking.
Yeah. I was also really pleased to see these two incredible paintings behind us. And again, the painting goes back to your beginning, and then there was a period of you not painting. And then I remember seeing paintings again at your show at PS1. So I was curious about that return to the...
Yes, well, again, it's really the circumstance which gives you the opportunity to do one thing or the other. When I arrived in Senegal, they showed me everything about the foundry, the library, the place where I was going to live, and they gave me a roll of canvas. And Casey said she was going to cut it. I said, no, no, don't cut it, you know. And, so I was able, because the room was big, to open the canvas, cut it the way I want. And I always wanted, since I've been going to Brittany in the summer, these last few years, to do those, this landscape of long hills going around. And that's the opportunity came and I made them. Yeah, I was very happy to find the place and the subject. And my friend here took me to the shop to buy brushes and buy colors and buy...
Good friend.
She came from Senegal.
Yeah. And the other work that I was very happy to see, or the body of work, are the boxes that I hadn't seen before. These, and it made so much sense to me that you work with containers, with boxes. But I was curious if you could share, why is the collaging of boxes something that you've repeatedly returned to?
Well, as you see, I always made collages on paper, standard paper. But then one day there was a box of a wine box, you know, long like this. And I found this amusing to make the collage on all sides and to actually make a little, like an arch on it so you can take it along, you know. And from there on...
Like a handbag? Or?
Like a handbag, yeah. Okay. And from there on, the idea of it, the container came, and then I made much bigger ones like this. You know, I was so into that boxes, and asked Hans Ulrich Obrist. He sent me Ellsworth Kelly's book in this carton. And I said, send me the second volume. I wanted the same box. I bought quite a few things because of the box. You have these whims. And,
Well, that's good. You can give the contents of the box as gifts and
but
keep
you
the box.
see, it's the first time we were
Yeah.
able to find a way to show the box because it's collaged on every side. And this wonderful idea of the mirror came from Jeannette, who is, wonderful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful installation.
Yeah.
And we've touched on the trees, but then there are some of other images of the spring 1968, with images that kind of made me step back a little bit because it's not how often I think about that moment in time. Very violent images. And I was curious what made you think about using that material. And you were making them in the pandemic as well, no? Or?
These were made in
Yeah.
the pandemic, but I started much, much before
Yeah.
that. I made some collage already in California, then in New York. The first one was really to make a contrast between, I had, for California is so beautiful, and so lush, these great forests. And and you see, I come from a country where there is no water, and children are on the streets. And so I made that first collage on the contrast between where I come from and where I was living. And then from there on, you go on. And I like also a lot of the reproductions of paintings. You want people to look at a certain Paul Klee, or it talks to you, the detail of Rembrandt. It's a conversation what you do with history of art more than in another, for me.
It's interesting because you talked about your references being more from music and from poetry, yet within the collage.
Yeah, in my work, but in the collage, it's more
Yeah,
history, yeah.
but you still within,
Or cultural stuff.
you see these historic painters emerging in your
Yes.
collage, but in a deconstructed way, as you say. It focuses on a detail often.
Yeah, yeah.
What normally doesn't always focus on within the bigger painting. Yeah. And I know that your father also spent some time in Vienna. No?
What?
Did your father spend time in Vienna?
He came as a student.
Yeah.
He was a student in Vienna after the First World War. And because his father was the drugman of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and there's a Archduke of Habsburg who came and stayed with my grandfather in Damascus, and so we had all these links. My father studied here, and his brother also. And then when he went back to Lebanon, but I was telling a friend just now that he never told us what he did. I cannot say where was he, in which cafe did he go, but his stay was extremely important for him. I think he had a very big love affair, I'm sure. But he never spoke. Men don't speak too much, don't talk too much. And then when he went back, he worked with Vienna, with Czechoslovakia, with all that. He started his business. I mean, the business existed, but he developed it. And he became Consul General of Austria in Damascus. And we were raised in a house where on the balcony was the Austrian flag. On the car was the Austrian flag. I mean, Austria was there all the time. And on my mother's side, too. Because you see, before World War I, we were the Ottoman Empire was was allied with Germany and Austria, and so the links were extremely. And a lot of Austrian people or German people lived in Damascus and married young, beautiful girls. And so this is how it's very dear to my heart. When I came here, even my family said, "Oh, you're going to." It's part of the history of the family. Yeah.
I was curious how much he had shared of his experience when he was living here, but
Unfortunately, he didn't share too much.
Yeah.
He didn't. But at the end of his life, he invited a young couple with a child, and he went out of his way to make them visit everything in Damascus, in Lebanon, everywhere. And I mean, he took care of them night and day. And he was already, just a year or two before his death. And we all said, we were sure he was his grandson. Who knows? We didn't ask the question. He didn't say. We don't even know his name. But I mean, the story was amazing.
That's incredible.
He appeared, and he just disappeared.
We need to do some kind of 23andMe and find.
So maybe I have cousins here running around.
You here? I wanted to ask just a few more questions, but one, I know you mentioned that you really began with these warriors that you made in 2008 that had never left. Well, this is the first time they've been out of Beirut. And why were these specific works so important to show in Vienna?
It's like I just said, that they are the most successful, I would say, among the warriors. Because after I made these 5, I made more. And I don't think they represent my idea as well. This is why I wanted to bring them. Also, the color is good. You never know when you are, for instance, you have reddish clay, then more yellow, and then here the spheres are black. It's the same clay, the same kind of firing the kiln. So it was a whole thing. For me, they represented something well made. This is why. And more than the others. I mean, I didn't make also. There are 4 more of them. It's not too many.
Yeah, there's always an element of chance when you put something in the kiln. And I just wanted to end, you mentioned earlier that your work is also for the future. So I was wondering if you have a message, if you could send one 100 years into the future.
People leave wills and take great pains into saying, do this when I'm dead, don't forget this, and nobody listens. So when I'm going to write, they will see what they want to see. But it's certainly something I want them to represent what we have been. But will they be seen like that? Who knows? Maybe. Maybe.
Wow. I think that's a beautiful way to stop. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Yeah.